Before I start my talk, I just want to ask one question from Bobby. Bobby, you had friends when you were young. Yeah, because it seemed like that everybody who was young and achieved something never had friends when they were young. So can we have the slides, please? So my talk is a little bit different than the talk that's been going on for a while now. So what I'm going to talk about is the betrayal of the intellectuals in the modern era, and the requirement of a new intellectual which should emerge not as an individual but as a class. So when you see the second half of the 21st century, what you see is there's a rise of populist and fascist forces around the globe. The world is spinning in a right conservative direction, starting majorly from India, as I believe, and then eventually Europe, Brexit happened, and the American presidential elections. You just cannot ignore what happened in America, including the rise of the Indian nationalist belligerents, as I should say. And then we are following Le Pen's elections in France, which would eventually shape what would become of the European Union. And as I see, the world is suffering from a strongman syndrome, where strongmen want to control political lives of the citizens of the world, and they want to crack down on domestic dissent and lead a propaganda. They want to lead a propaganda which is a clear overlay, and they want to picturize a problem. They want to portray a problem to the society, and they want the society to solve that problem, which totally overshadows what the problem exactly is. And these problems, the populists want an immediate public response, which is often violent in nature, and which, as I mentioned previously, is actually overshadowing the real problems in the country. For example, let's take a right example in India. It is not important of that what we eat. What is important is we solve the problem of poverty in this country. So, and for those who deny that they're the state-sponsored machinery, which can actually lead to these propagandas, I should remind you that the Nazi propaganda, which annihilated an entire generation of people, was a state-sponsored propaganda. The post-9/11 wars, which killed 300,000 people in Afghanistan and Iraq only, was a state-sponsored propaganda. And the Syrian refugee crisis, which looks like a continuous threat to the Western world, isn't it a state-sponsored propaganda? And it's a very serious question to ask. And what we have seen in the second half of in the second decade of the 21st century, that there is a rise of formidable egotists who want to penetrate in the social hegemony and want to control every single thing. They are totalitarians, they are authoritarians, and we as sovereigns have given them all the rights because we have been, we've been swayed away by the media. And the way we have been swayed away by the media, that is what I call the betrayal of the intellectual. The intellectuals, by their pro-establishment approach, have betrayed the public. The intellectuals, the journalists, the writers, have betrayed the public by using their authority on their voice, the authority of their influence to sway the public into believing something which is entirely fake, which is absolutely contrary to the reality, and hence have betrayed society in a total sense. I can give you some examples from the US. When the rise of capitalism was happening in the Cold War era, Francis Fukuyama and Samuel Huntington, who wrote the book called The Clash of the Civilization in the US, he was continuously criticized for his pro-establishment approach. In India, primarily, when you look at people, the traditional intellectuals, they, in their pro-establishment approach, they have betrayed, in my opinion, and I'm continuously stating it's my opinion, they've betrayed the people who had faith in them. the whole propaganda of the state-sponsored machinery, and these people have become the beneficiaries of the state, and hence the betrayal happened. And so has been the case of Dalits and Muslims in India. I ask the question why there are no actual organic leaders amongst the communities in Dalits and Muslims. Because all these thought leaders have betrayed or been bought by state machineries. And all these communities have suffered because of the betrayal of the intellectual. We are waiting for barbarians to come and swing between the arrival and the fear. And in that waiting, ladies and gentlemen, we as a civilization have become the barbarians ourselves. And we have completely forgotten that society is a harmony of separate notes. And we are completely swayed by the idea, the populist idea of utopian optimism. And I want to ask you, aren't all utopias but impossible dreams? And in our case, an absolute nightmare. And the other question which comes to our mind is why intellectuals have betrayed the society. I know this has been going on in your mind, that why intellectuals have betrayed the society. Because the simple answer can be that it is easy and comfortable to be pro-establishment. It's very easy to be pro-establishment. It takes an immense amount of courage to stand against what the mass believes, and it takes immense amount of courage to put out your opinions when the masses reject to even acknowledge your opinions. And the stand of the intellectual, which was supposed to be contrary to the status quo, has been pro-establishment. And now the other question comes, who is an intellectual that I talk about? So there are the three brilliant definitions have been given in the study of the intellectuals. The first one was given by the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who was imprisoned by Mussolini, which speaks volumes about how when people stir their neck out and speak about things that matter and what happened to them. So Antonio Gramsci talked about intellectuals in two senses. The first intellectual, he says, is a traditional intellectual. The traditional intellectuals are teachers, bureaucrats, priests, who on generation to generation go on talking about doing the same function in the society. And the other are organic intellectuals. Organic intellectuals are the intellectuals who are totally associated with the enterprise. They're connected with the vital realities of the society. And hence, ladies and gentlemen, mostly are used as minions of the establishment to gain more power and to organize interest. On the other hand, there's another definition by the French thinker Julien Benda, who wrote a beautiful book called The Betrayal of the Intellectual, which is also the title of my talk. And his intellectual is an high and mighty philosopher king who often says that my kingdom is not of this world. And the third is a more relevant one, which is given by a Palestine-born American thinker, Edward Said, who says that an intellectual is an outsider, an amateur, and the disturber of the status quo. And he's totally unashamed and uncompromising, and for whom no worldly power is big enough to be criticized. But then, all of this happened. And now, since the classical intellectuals have betrayed the society, we need a new generation of intellectuals. The generation that I call the new intellectual. Not in the English sense of the word, which is an individual, but in the French sense of the word, which is the pluralistic. As Edward Said mentioned that the intellectual is an outsider who looks at the world objectively. To me, the new intellectual is an insider who lives in the public, who brings dialogue to the public sphere by living in the public, talking about the public, for the public, in the public, and for whom the boundaries and nations are not geographic, for whom everything other than humanity is not important. And he's not ashamed to raise his voice of dissent, and for whom it is very important to talk about things that matter. Question, even if they're embarrassing. The French thinkers Pascal Augy and Franco Serenielli have talked about intellectuals. And these intellectuals, as I mentioned in my talk, are intellectuals who are not the intellectuals by the function or the stand they have, but by the interventions that they make in the public sphere. And these intellectuals should emerge out of underutilized human potential around the globe. And they're not afraid to ask comfortable questions. They ask uncomfortable questions which are often embarrassing in nature. And these intellectuals should bear witness to transcend their own opinions for the larger purpose. And the new intellectual is an act of revenge, as Camus puts it, a measure of overcoming fate by imposing a form upon it. And these intellectuals, the new intellectuals which I talk about as a class, should sustain a public dialogue, a dialogue which is sustainable, which goes on, which doesn't stop. I, as a scientist, have come out from my cocoon to talk about things which concern humanity. It would do no good, absolutely no good, where specialists will talk to specialists only. Historians talking to historians will do no good, because mass hysteria will go on propagating. The classical intellectuals, the teachers have to come out of their cocoons. The scientists have to come out of their cocoons. The experts have to come down from the pedestals that they've been standing on, stand in the public and talk about things that matter. And ladies and gentlemen, I think nobody in the house would disagree with me that these are the times which are the times of moral crisis. Not political, but moral. And we have to become the custodians of liberal thought, of equality, and most importantly and above all, humanity. And if we fail to do so, the generations are going to judge on how we behave in the times that we are in. These are the times which are crossroads. And at crossroads, every time the humanity has come across any kind of frontier or a crossroad, at crossroad it is impossible. It is absolutely impossible to avoid the truth. We have to come out of the comforts which insulate us from the harsh realities of life. And we have to let that quotidian slip away and be vulnerable. And being vulnerable is what the new intellectual should function as a class in the society. And in the times that we live in, the times where social media enthralls everything, where social media covers, the 90% of what the civilization is, we have an unprecedented power to create a voice. But are we actually using that power? We, as a new generation, have to come out of the selfish cocoons that we live in. That me and myself, we have to come out for a collective purpose, emerge as a new class. For me, the new intellectual will again come to a crossroad, whether to succumb to enemies' satisfaction, become ill-hearted, illiberal half-brother, or to become guardian of the contemporary world, to go on saving freedom and decreasing injustice. And these are the times which not only shape the new intellectual, but also test their mettle. And as medieval poet Dante said, the darkest places in the hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in the times of moral crisis. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.